The holographic display flickered to life in the center of the guild's war room, casting eerie blue light across the assembled faces of the galaxy's most feared assassins. Guildmaster Vex studied the contract details with growing unease, his scaled fingers drumming against the obsidian table. The target file showed 3 human diplomats, seemingly ordinary beings from a species that had only recently emerged onto the galactic stage. "The payment is substantial," Vex announced to his lieutenants, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had orchestrated the deaths of countless political figures across a dozen star systems. "The Catherian Empire wants these humans eliminated before they can finalize the peace accords with the Meridian Collective." Around the table, the guild's elite shifted uncomfortably. Kyla, a shadow-dancing Umbrathi with a perfect kill record spanning 2 centuries, was the first to speak. "Master Vex, perhaps we should review the historical data on human targets before accepting this contract." Vex's eyes narrowed. In 30 years of leading the guild, he had never heard such hesitation from his best operative. "Explain." "No assassin has ever successfully eliminated a human target," Kala said quietly. "Not once, not ever." The statement hung in the air like a death sentence. Vex pulled up the guild's classified archives, his claws clicking rapidly across. The control interface. The records painted an impossible picture: 17 separate contracts on human targets over the past 50 years, each one ending in failure despite being handled by the guild's most skilled operatives. The first case involved Agent Nox, a crystalline infiltrator capable of shape-shifting at the molecular level. His target had been a human trade negotiator named Blake who was disrupting Catherian mining operations in the Outer Rim. Nox had spent months studying Blake's routines, infiltrating his security detail, and planning the perfect strike. Yet somehow, Blake had survived when a malfunctioning coffee machine, device Nox had never even considered, had created a steam explosion that exposed his crystalline form to Blake's security team. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Sci-Fi stellar conflict is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you're hungry for HFY battles and tales of human valor against alien might, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring these frontlines to you. The second case was even more bewildering. Master Assassin Grix had targeted a human colony administrator using a precision neurotoxin that had never failed to kill any carbon-based life form. The human had not only survived, but had somehow developed temporary telepathic abilities that allowed him to expose an entire Catherian spy network. "This is impossible," Vex muttered, scrolling through case after case of failed assassinations. "These humans appear to have no special genetic modifications, no advanced technology, no psychic abilities. They should be among the easiest targets in the galaxy." His lieutenant, a cybernetic Nexari named Quantum, interfaced directly with the guild's combat analysis systems. "Master, the pattern suggests something beyond luck or coincidence. Every failed assassination has resulted in consequences that were beneficial to humanity while being catastrophic to their enemies." Vex stood, his imposing figure casting long shadows across the war room. The Catherian Empire was the guild's most lucrative client, responsible for nearly 40% of their annual contracts. Refusing this assignment would mean economic disaster for the organization. Yet accepting it might mean something far worse: the destruction of the guild's reputation built on centuries of perfect execution. "We need to understand what makes these humans so problematic," Vex decided. "Kala, I want you to personally investigate every failed human assassination. Interview the survivors, analyze the circumstances, find the pattern. Until we understand why we cannot kill them, we cannot risk another failure." As the meeting dispersed, Vex remained alone in the war room, staring at the holographic profiles of the 3 human diplomats. Ambassador Reed, the lead negotiator, smiled warmly from his file photo, an expression that somehow seemed both innocent and unsettling. There was something about the human's eyes that suggested depths the guild's psychological profiles had failed to capture. The Catherian Empire's message was clear: eliminate these humans or face the consequences of a peace treaty that would end their expansion ambitions forever. But as Vex studied the impossible record of human survival, he began to wonder if they were dealing with something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Kala's investigation began in the Guild's memory vaults, where the experiences of failed assassins were stored in crystalline matrices. She interfaced with the first recording, feeling the residual emotions of Agent Knox as his memories played. Out in her consciousness, the crystalline assassin had been confident, perhaps overconfident. His target, trade negotiator Blake, had followed a predictable routine for weeks. Morning coffee at the same cafe, afternoon meetings in the same conference room, evening walks through the same park. Knox had shapeshifted into Blake's preferred barista, planning to introduce a neural disruptor into his morning coffee, a method that had never failed in over 200 successful assassinations. Yet when Blake had entered the cafe that morning, something had been different. The human had paused, sniffed the air, and suddenly insisted on making his own coffee. When Knox had protested, Blake had laughed and said something about feeling adventurous today. The ancient coffee machine had malfunctioned during Blake's amateur brewing attempt, creating a superheated steam explosion that had revealed Knox's crystalline form to the security team. But that wasn't the strangest part. Blake had somehow convinced the security team not to kill Knox, instead interrogating him about Cytherian operations. Within hours, Blake had used the information to expose a smuggling ring that had been funneling weapons to 3 different rebel groups. The failed assassination had accidentally created a major diplomatic victory for humanity. The next memory was from Grix, the toxin specialist. Her target had been Colony Administrator Park, a human overseeing mining operations on a disputed world. Grix had spent months developing a specialized neurotoxin that would cause Park to appear to die of natural causes. The poison had been undetectable, untraceable, and had never failed to kill any carbon-based life form. Park had consumed the toxin during a formal dinner with Cytherian officials. He had collapsed as expected, but instead of dying, he had begun experiencing what human medical records later described as impossible neural activity. For 6 hours, Park had existed in a state between life and death, during which he had somehow accessed the thoughts and memories of every Cytherian present at the dinner. When Park had recovered, he had detailed knowledge of a planned invasion of human colonies, complete with attack routes, supply lines, and the names of every conspirator. The Cytherian Empire had been forced to abandon their expansion plans and had spent the next decade dealing with the political fallout. Kala continued through the memories, each one more disturbing than the last. A human physicist who had survived a molecular disintegrator by accidentally achieving quantum consciousness. A human artist who had turned a mind control attempt into a galaxy-wide empathy broadcast that had ended 2 separate wars. A human child who had somehow convinced a shape-shifting assassin to abandon the guild entirely and become a kindergarten teacher. The pattern was undeniable but incomprehensible. Humans didn't just survive assassination attempts, they transformed them into opportunities for growth, connection, and positive change. It was as if the universe itself was conspiring to protect them, turning their greatest weaknesses into their greatest strengths. "This is beyond luck," Kala reported to Vex. "These humans appear to exist in a state of constant probability manipulation. They make decisions that should be fatal, yet somehow these decisions lead to outcomes that benefit not just themselves, but entire civilizations." Vex studied the compiled data with growing alarm. The guild's reputation was built on understanding their targets, predicting their behavior, and exploiting their weaknesses. But humans seemed to have no predictable patterns, no exploitable weaknesses, and no adherence to logical behavioral models. "There must be something we're missing," Vex insisted. "No species can be this anomalous. Perhaps their unpredictability is itself predictable. If we can model their chaos, we can find a way to eliminate them." But as Kala delved deeper into the records, she discovered something that chilled her to her core. The surviving assassins who had attempted to kill humans had all reported the same disturbing phenomenon. In the moments before their failures, they had experienced something unprecedented doubt. Not tactical uncertainty, but existential doubt about the morality of their actions. For the first time in guild history, professional killers had hesitated not because of fear, but because of conscience. And in that moment of hesitation, the humans had somehow turned certain death into impossible salvation. Ambassador Reed sat in his modest quarters aboard the neutral space station, reviewing the peace treaty that would change the balance of power in the galaxy. The Catherian Empire had been expanding aggressively for decades, consuming smaller civilizations and enslaving entire species. But humanity had done something unprecedented. They had convinced the Meridian Collective and 6 other major powers to form a coalition, based on mutual cooperation rather than conquest. Vex had spent 3 months planning Reed's assassination, utilizing every resource the Guild possessed. He had studied human psychology, consulted with xenobiologists, and even hired a team of chaos theorists to model human unpredictability. The plan was perfect in its simplicity: a single molecular disruptor shot during Reed's morning meditation, a practice the human had maintained religiously for 20 years. The Guildmaster had positioned himself in the station's ventilation system, his specialized armor masking his heat signature and dampening his electromagnetic field. His weapon was charged with enough energy to disintegrate a battleship, yet focused to target only Reed's neural pathways. There would be no body, no evidence, no possibility of survival. Reed began his meditation as usual, sitting cross-legged on a simple mat, his eyes closed and his breathing steady. Vex aligned his weapon, calculating the exact trajectory needed to penetrate the quarter shielding. His finger tightened on the trigger. Then Reed spoke, his eyes still closed. "I know. You're there." Vex froze. His position was impossible to detect, his presence completely masked by Guild technology. Yet Reed continued speaking, his voice calm and conversational. "I've been expecting an assassin for weeks. The Catherian Empire has too much to lose if this treaty is signed. I assume you're from the Guild. Your reputation precedes you." Reed opened his eyes and looked directly at Vex's hiding position. "Would you like some tea? I find that killing is much more civilized when shared over a warm beverage." The invitation was so absurd, so contrary to every logical response to imminent death, that Vex actually hesitated. In that moment of confusion, Reed rose and moved to his small kitchen, beginning to prepare tea as if entertaining a friend rather than facing his executioner. "I've studied your organization extensively," Reed continued, measuring tea leaves with steady hands. 97% success rate across 12,000 contracts. Impressive. Though I notice you've never successfully eliminated a human target. That must be frustrating. Vex should have fired immediately. Every tactical instinct screamed at him to end this bizarre conversation with a single shot. Instead, he found himself listening as Reed continued his impossible monologue. "The thing about humans is that we're fundamentally irrational. We make decisions based on emotion, intuition, and hope rather than logic. It drives most species absolutely mad." Reed smiled as he poured hot water into 2 cups. "But our irrationality is our greatest strength. We see possibilities where others see only problems. We find connections where others see only chaos." The tea was ready. Reed set both cups on his small table and sat down, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Your weapon won't work, you know. Not because I'm protected by some advanced technology, but because killing me would create consequences that the universe simply won't allow." Vex fired. The molecular disruptor beam struck Reed directly in the chest, carrying enough energy to vaporize his entire torso. Instead, the beam scattered into harmless light patterns that danced around the room, like aurora displays. Reed calmly sipped his tea as if nothing had happened. "I'm not immortal," Reed explained, "but I'm part of something larger than myself. Every human is connected to every other human in ways that transcend physical space. When you threaten one of us, you threaten all of us. And when you threaten all of us, you threaten the very fabric of possibility itself." Vex's weapon overloaded, its power cells drained by the impossible energy dissipation. He dropped from the ventilation shaft, his perfect plan crumbling into chaos. But as he looked at Reed, he saw something that terrified him more than any failure: compassion. "You don't have to keep doing this," Reed said gently. "The Guild exists because species believe that death is the only solution to their problems. But humans have learned something different. We've learned that every problem is also an opportunity. Every enemy is also a potential friend, and every ending is also a beginning." The assassination attempt had been recorded by the station's security systems. But rather than exposing the Guild's involvement, Reed had done something unprecedented. He had invited the other treaty negotiators to watch the recording, explaining how the failed assassination demonstrated humanity's commitment to peace even in the face of death. The treaty was signed that day, with species that had witnessed Reed's impossible survival, now convinced that humanity possessed something they desperately needed: the ability to transform conflict into cooperation, fear into hope, and death into life. The news of Vex's failure spread through the galactic underworld like wildfire. For the first time in Guild history, a master assassin had not only failed to eliminate a target, but had been captured alive and unharmed. The recording of Reed's impossible survival played on every information network, showing the molecular disruptor beam harmlessly dissipating around the human diplomat as he calmly sipped tea. Within days, the Guild faced an unprecedented crisis. 3 of their most skilled operatives resigned, citing existential concerns about the nature of their profession. 5 more refused to accept any contracts involving human targets. The remaining assassins demanded hazard pay increases of 300% for any mission in human space. Kal A stood before Vex in his private chambers, her report more disturbing than any failed mission. "Master, we have a problem. The psychological evaluations of our operatives show a pattern of what human therapists call empathic awakening. Assassins who have encountered humans are experiencing unprecedented levels of conscience development." Vex's scaled hands trembled as he reviewed the data. Agent Knox, the crystalline who had failed to kill trade negotiator Blake, had established a shelter for war orphans on a neutral world. Master Grix had become a toxicologist working to develop antidotes for the poisons she had once created. Even the cybernetic quantum had begun questioning the morality of assassination contracts. "It's as if humans carry some kind of psychological virus," Vex muttered. "Exposure to them appears to activate dormant empathy centers in the brain. How is this possible?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Nova, a human xenopsychologist who had been studying the Guild's failures, requested a meeting with Vex. Despite every instinct screaming danger, Vex agreed to the encounter. Driven by a desperate need to understand his enemy, Dr. Nova arrived at the Guild's hidden base, accompanied only by a translator droid. Her courage either foolish or remarkable. She was a small woman with kind eyes and graying hair, appearing utterly harmless yet somehow radiating an aura of profound strength. "You're trying to understand why you can't kill us," she said without preamble. "The answer isn't in our biology or technology. It's in our fundamental approach to existence." Vex activated every security protocol, surrounding himself with energy shields and targeting systems. Dr. Nova ignored the weapons trained on her, instead pulling out a simple photograph showing a group of human children playing in a park. "Every human child learns a concept that most species never discover," she explained. "We call it Ubuntu, the understanding that we are all interconnected, that our humanity is defined by our relationships with others. When you try to kill one of us, you're not just attacking an individual. You're attacking the entire web of connections that define our existence." The photograph began to glow with the same aurora-like patterns that had absorbed Vex's weapon. As the light spread, Vex felt something he had never experienced before: a sudden, overwhelming understanding of the pain his actions had caused throughout the galaxy. The faces of every victim, the grief of every family, the suffering of every civilization touched by the Guild's work crashed over him like a tidal wave. "This is what humans call empathy," Dr. Nova said softly. "The ability to feel what others feel, to understand that their pain is our pain, their joy is our joy. It's not a weakness, it's the source of our greatest strength." Across the galaxy, the Catherian Empire was discovering the true cost of their failed assassination attempt. The treaty Reed had negotiated was more than a peace agreement. It was a fundamental restructuring of galactic civilization, based on human principles of cooperation and mutual support. Species that had been enemies for millennia began establishing trade partnerships. The Meridian Collective opened its borders to refugees from war-torn worlds. Even the militant Votari Republic began dismantling their slave camps and establishing rehabilitation centers for former soldiers. Emperor Thane of the Catherian Empire watched his power base crumble as world after world declared independence. choosing to join the human-led coalition rather than remain under his rule. His military commanders were defecting, his economic advisors were resigning, and his own people were demanding democratic reforms. How did one failed assassination cause this? Thane demanded of his remaining advisors. We've eliminated thousands of leaders throughout history. Why are these humans different? The answer came from his chief intelligence officer, a broken being who had spent months studying human behavior. Your Majesty, we've been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding. We believed that eliminating leaders would eliminate their influence, but humans don't follow leaders, they follow ideas. And the idea of universal empathy and cooperation is spreading faster than any weapon we possess. The guild was dissolving from within. Assassins were not just refusing contracts, they were actively working to protect their former targets. The organization that had once been the most feared force in the galaxy was transforming into something unprecedented, a network of reformed killers dedicated to preventing the violence they had once created. As Vex looked at the photograph of human children, still glowing with impossible light, he realized that the war was already over. Humanity had won not through superior weapons or tactics, but through their ability to transform enemies into allies, fear into hope, and death into life. 6 months after the failed assassination of Ambassador Reed, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The Catherian Empire's territory had shrunk to a handful of core worlds, surrounded by former colonies that had voluntarily joined the human coalition. Emperor Thane sat in his diminished throne room, facing a delegation that would have been impossible a year earlier. Ambassador Reed led the group, flanked by 2 former guild assassins who now served as his personal protectors. Vex and Kyla had traded their weapons for diplomatic credentials, their intimate knowledge of galactic politics making them invaluable peacekeepers. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The beings who had once been hired to kill Reed were now dedicated to preserving his life. Your Majesty, Reed began, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had once faced down a molecular disruptor. The coalition offers you a choice. You can continue to resist the tide of change, watching your empire crumble world by world, or you can join us in building something better. Thane's scaled features twisted with barely contained rage. You offer me surrender disguised as negotiation. My ancestors conquered half the galaxy. I will not be the emperor who gives it away to a species that has existed in space for less than a century. We're not asking you to give anything away, Reed replied. We're asking you to transform it. The coalition doesn't seek to destroy the Catherian Empire. We want to help it evolve into something greater. On the table between them, Reed placed a detailed proposal that had been crafted by human sociologists, former guild operatives, and reformed Catherian officials. It outlined a transition plan that would maintain Catherian cultural identity while eliminating the oppressive systems that had defined their empire. Your people would retain their worlds, their government, their traditions, Reed explained. But instead of ruling through fear and conquest, you would lead through cooperation and mutual benefit. Your military would become a peacekeeping force. Your expansion would be through invitation rather than invasion. Vex stepped forward, his presence still commanding despite his transformation. Your Majesty, I have spent my life studying the weaknesses of civilizations. The Catherian Empire's greatest weakness is not its enemies, it's the fear that drives its every decision. Fear of being conquered, fear of showing weakness, fear of change itself. And humans? Thane asked bitterly, what do they fear? Nothing, Vex replied. They fear nothing because they have learned to transform every fear into an opportunity for growth. They face death with curiosity, meet enemies with compassion, and encounter the unknown with excitement rather than terror. The former assassins. Words carried weight that no diplomat could match. Thane had seen the guild's files, knew the impossible record of human survival. He had watched his empire crumble as world after world chose cooperation over conquest, hope over fear. The terms are generous, Kala added, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had once calculated the precise angles of death. Your people keep their dignity, their culture, their freedom. You lose only the right to oppress others. The proposal included something unprecedented in galactic history, a rehabilitation program for former oppressors. Cytherian officials who had committed crimes against subject species would face justice, but justice tempered with the possibility of redemption. The program was based on human concepts of restorative rather than retributive justice. "Your species has a saying," Reed continued, "that the tree that bends in the wind survives the storm while the rigid oak breaks. The galaxy is changing, Your Majesty. The question is whether the Cytherian Empire will bend and grow stronger, or break and fade into history." Thane studied the faces around him, his former enemies offering him salvation, his former allies gone or defected, his empire reduced to a shadow of its former self. The human ambassador watched him with patient compassion, apparently willing to wait forever for the right decision. "If I agree to these terms," Thane said finally, "what guarantee do I have that humanity won't simply replace one empire with another?" Reed smiled, the same expression that had once unsettled Vex in his mission briefings. "Because we're not interested in ruling anyone. We're interested in growing together. The Coalition isn't a human empire, it's a community of equals working towards shared goals." The signing ceremony took place on the same neutral station where Vex had failed to assassinate Reed. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to witness the transformation of the galaxy's most feared empire into its newest member of the cooperation-based coalition. As Thane signed the treaty, he looked up at Reed with something approaching wonder. "How do you do it? How do you turn enemies into allies, fear into hope, death into life?" Reed's answer was simple, carrying the weight of humanity's greatest discovery. "We remember that we're all part of the same story. Every being in this galaxy is connected to every other being. When we help others grow, we grow. When we lift others up, we rise. When we choose love over fear, we choose life over death." The former guild assassins, now serving as the Coalition's peacekeepers, watched the ceremony with emotions they were still learning to understand. They had been instruments of death, but humanity had transformed them into guardians of life. The galaxy was entering a new age, one where the impossible had become inevitable, where former enemies had become family, and where the simple human understanding of universal connection had rewritten the rules of existence itself. The war was over. The age of empathy had begun.